Ronald George Alexander Ungerer was born February 16, 1917, in West New York, New Jersey. When he was young, he dropped out of school to work in a factory to raise money for his family. He also sang in a band and boxed to raise money before he became a playwright. He also organized the Broadway Performers Fund for the United States Service Organization run by his sister.
Before making plays of his own, he appeared in some performances on Broadway. When he finally got in the groove of playwriting, he produced such works as Nobody Loves an Albatross,
The Grand Prize, and Holiday for Lovers on Broadway.
He also wrote Return to Peyton Place and episodes for The Dick Van Dyke Show. His first Broadway hit was, of course, Time Out for Ginger, which later became a movie called Billy, starring Patty Duke. He wrote the screenplay for Billy as well.
Ronald Alexander died at the age of 78 on April 24, 1995, from cancer in the Calvary Hospital in the Bronx.
Fun fact, he's my great-great-uncle. Unfortunately, we've never had the pleasure of meeting.
Time Out for Ginger was directed by Shepard Trobe and starred Melvyn Douglas as Howard Carroll, Polly Rhodes as Agnes Carroll, Mary Hardig as Joan, Conrad Janis as Eddie Davis, Philip Loeb as Ed Hoffman, Nancy Malone as Ginger, Laura Pierpont as Lizzie, Larry Robinson as Tommy, Lois Smith as Joan, and Roland Wood as Mr. Wilson.
Melvyn Douglas as Howard Carroll. Brooks Atkinson writes in his New York Times Review, an old hand at popular comedy, Melvyn Douglas is the dynamo of the performance. His description with gestures of a football play is uproariously energetic and ought to keep him in good physical condition all winter.
By the time Melvyn Douglas was cast in Time Out for Ginger, he had reached his 30th year as an actor. By the time he died, he had 111 film credits under his belt. He won 2 Oscars, 1 Golden Globe, 1 Tony, and an Emmy. He died of pneumonia and cardiac complications.
Polly Rolls as Agnes Carroll. Polly Rolls as the patient mother, a little too smoke for a working mother in the first scene, but sound and thoroughly agreeable toward the end, writes Brooks Atkinson in his New York Times Review. Polly Rolls was born Mary Elizabeth Rolls in Philadelphia, January 10, 1914.
She acted on stage and screen for over 60 years. According to her obituary in the New York Times, she developed a reputation for playing snappy and sardonic older women.
Nancy Malone as Ginger. And Nancy Malone, as the troubled football player, gives a first-rate performance that becomes more sensitive as the evening progresses and finishes as something shyly triumphant, writes Brooks Atkinson in his New York Times Review. Nancy Malone's stage debut was Time Out for Ginger, and had quite a successful career in acting after that. She started modeling by the age of 7, and by 1962, she had already had 1,000 television appearances. She is described by John P. Shanley in his article in the New York Times as being a young woman with ambition and independent ideas. Philip Loeb as Ed Hoffman. Brooks Atkinson writes Philip Loeb, comical and effective as a bank president who knows how to time his remarks for the skeptical humor that is in them. Philip Loeb played many a comical character during his lifetime. He started acting in high school and later served in the army. He began acting professionally in the 1920s. Unfortunately, he was blacklisted from the Hollywood industry in 1952, not too soon after his run in Time Out for Ginger. Sadly, he died from an overdose of sleeping pills in 1955 at the age of 61. His body was found in a hotel. It is suspected that he killed himself because of being unemployed because of the blacklist.
Shepard Trobe.
Shepard Trobe.
The director. Shepard Trobe produced and directed one of Broadway's longest-running plays in the 1940s, called Angel Street. This was long before Phantom and Cats came out. It ran for 1,295 performances when it was only supposed to run for 3. He founded and became the first president of the Society of Stage Directors and Choreographers. He taught at Yale and became managing director of the Equity Library Theater in 1956. By the time he died at 76, he had produced and directed for more than 40 years.
Time Out for Ginger. Time Out for Ginger opened November 26, 1952 at the Lyceum Theater. Before it opened on Broadway, it had a trial run 2 years prior in Houston, Texas, and was part of the Straw Hat Circuit, aka the Summer Stock Theaters, which started in the 1920s. The Summer Stock Theaters were a group of theaters in Pennsylvania and New York City that would produce a string of plays 1 or 2 weeks at a time during the summer. The play itself was about a father and his 3 daughters, one of which wanted to be a football player. Keep in mind that this was the 50s and the women's movement had barely begun. This play was obviously making a statement on women's roles in society. Atkinson described it as comedic and heartwarming. He says, "The relations between adults and adolescents are startling enough to be funny in their own right, and Mr. Alexander has portrayed them accurately." However, it doesn't only focus on women's roles in parent-child relationships, but also on the dating habits of the time. Overall, the play is said to be a pretty decent production.